Hi and welcome. Thank you so much for the invitation to present to you today. I'm so sorry that I can't be up in Sunderland with you. I'd have loved to have come to the city. I've never been, so it would have been a really nice day or two. But unfortunately, time and resources conspired against me. But I hope that you have an amazing day. I know that you do some amazing work up there, and I hope you have a really valuable day. My name is Tim Woodhouse, and I've been Suicide Prevention Programme Manager down in Kent since 2014. And since about 2018, I've been focused on the global search, really, looking for best practice in relation to domestic abuse related suicides, because they're happening way too often, and we need to address that. I know you're all very used to working in this field, but please be aware that my presentation does contain quotes from people who have attempted to take their own lives after being impacted by DA. So please, do what you need to do to look after yourself. The picture down in Kent Medway is really depressing and very heartbreaking, to be honest. We know that we have lost 291 individuals who have died by suicide between 2018 and 2024 after being impacted by domestic abuse. That is a huge proportion, 33% out of all of our suspected suicides. But we know that it's definitely going to be an underestimate. I've put very likely to be an underestimate there. It's guaranteed to be an underestimate, really, because we know that, and you'll know just as well as I do, that domestic abuse is very underreported, both to agencies, to professionals, and to even friends and family. What do I mean by saying impacted by domestic abuse? Well, we know very much that there are victims of domestic abuse who are dying by suicide, both male and female, but more female than male victims. We definitely know that perpetrators are dying by suicide, and you can see a much greater number of male perpetrators than female. And then there's this category in the middle, and these are people who are known to Kent Police as both victims and perpetrators. So I should say that all of my stats come from Kent Police, and this is their terminology. I not quite got a handle on exactly who is in this category. I think there's probably a mix. I think there will be people who are primarily perpetrators and make malicious counter allegations that they are also a victim of abuse to further try and control or harm their victim. And then there will be people who are known as primarily victims who either fight back or fight back in self-defense, the violent resistor typology, and then be labelled by the police as a perpetrator as well as a victim. And that can be really damaging to on both practical and emotional levels. You can see here some of the time frames involved. So the first groups over here are victims, and you can see there are some victims who are dying on the same day as the last known domestic abuse incident. There are some victims dying within 12 months of the last known DA incident, and then some in both recent and historical, and then some victims who are dying after 12 months prior to the last known incident was 12 months prior to the death. We'll come on to why actually historical is a bad term for that, because just because the abuse happened a while back doesn't mean that the impact of the trauma is any less real. And you can see both the timeframes for both perpetrators and victims and perpetrators, and you'll see that by far the biggest number of people dying are those people who are known as both victims and perpetrators, and where the abuse was both recent and over that 12 months ago. How do we match with other local areas? How do we match with Sunderland, for instance? I don't know, because I don't think there are many other areas counting domestic abuse related suicides. I'd love to know if I'm wrong about Sunderland. I don't think your public health team up there do count, but if they do, then I'd love to know. And you wouldn't be alone, because I'm not aware of any other local area at the moment that is both counting and publishing their data. But Victoria and Australia do and have, and this is a much bigger sample than even our data in Kent, and they found that 25% of their suicides have been impacted by DA. 25% isn't 33%. We found 33% in Kent and Medway, but it's still a very big proportion, and I'm pretty reassured actually by the fact that 33%, 25%, they're in the same ballpark figure. So I don't think Kent is an outlier. I'm sure that in Sunderland you'll be experiencing something similar, but it's probably just hidden at the moment. Also, just wanted to highlight the National Police Chiefs Council report from the last couple of years, which has highlighted that there were more suspected victim suicides following DA than there were intimate partner homicides. Or in other words, that actually the person most likely to kill a victim of domestic abuse is themselves. And that's staggering, and I think it has profound implications on the way that we as a country respond to domestic abuse. Certainly the situation in Kent Medway, and I presume other parts of the country as well as Sunderland, is that the primary focus of the domestic abuse sector is to keep that victim safe from harm from the perpetrator. And I totally understand that. Obviously that needs to continue. We need to do a better job. We need to invest more time, money and resource into that. However, in addition, we also need to put time, energy and money and resources into keeping those victims of domestic abuse safe from suicide, because actually that is where the majority of deaths are happening at the moment. So to understand more, as well as the stats, we've spoken to a number of survivors who have attempted to take their own life. And the question we asked them was, what drove you to attempting suicide?
I knew that he was going to kill me, so it wasn't a matter of choosing to die, just who was going to do it.
And their answers were actually quite different. So there was this first category of survivors who were so convinced that they were going to be murdered by their perpetrator that actually it was a better choice for them to have some control over the way they died, which is obviously a horrific position to be in. But that wasn't true for everyone.
I thought I was worthless, like I didn't deserve to be alive, and that everything they said was true. I was horrible, and that the only way out was for me to die.
So people in this category were so broken down by the lies and the manipulation from the perpetrator that they thought the world was a better place without them. They believed what the perpetrator was saying, that they had no friends, their family hated them, and it was just better if they weren't around. But again, that wasn't true for everyone either.
You go into survival mode. You're hyper-vigilant. It's exhausting and tiring. I was sick of fighting. I was sick of surviving. I knew when I woke up that day, I would attempt suicide.
So these people, they're not convinced they're going to be murdered. They're not believing the lies from their perpetrator, but they simply cannot find another way to make the abuse stop. The abuse has been going on for so long, they may or may not have reached out to services. Those services have either let them down or not been able to end the abuse. And there's nothing else that person can think of doing to make the abuse stop other than to die by suicide, which is obviously a horrific, tragic situation to be in. But again, not the only category.
I felt broken. I felt so many emotions: shame, hurt, fear, grief. I felt like damaged goods. I couldn't sleep at night. I was having flashbacks and he was on Tinder finding the next victim.
So this is that category of people where the abusive relationship has ended, and in fact I know quite a lot of times the abuse continues post-relationship. However, in this case it wasn't. It was just that the victim was so traumatized by the abuse that she had suffered, she was unable to get on with her life and she was unable to fully recover. And her suicide attempt came many months, over 6 months after the abusive relationship had ended, which is really important for services because obviously, and I presume it's the same up with yourselves as it is in Kent and Medway. We are so good and so focused on supporting survivors right at crisis point, right at the heat of the in the high risk moments. However, what we're less good at doing down in Kent Medway is that long-term support, that ongoing recovery response, even after the direct abuse has stopped. Should also highlight that it's not just female victims who are dying.
The way she abused me was very different to the way abuse is traditionally depicted. It wasn't violent, but if you can drive someone insane to the point they want to take their own life, then that's just as damaging.
So I mentioned that I had completed a Churchill Fellowship. This is the front cover of my Churchill Fellowship report, which I published in February. It's called 66 Ways to Reduce Domestic Abuse Related Suicides. I'm not going to go through each one of those. However, it is obviously publicly available. The link's on the slide if you want to go and download it yourself. I'm just going to run through a few quick ones though. But just first, if you don't know what a Churchill Fellowship is, it's a UK-based charity set up by Winston Churchill's family back in the late 60s. And they fund UK citizens to travel anywhere in the world and research anything they want in the world. And then just come back and try and make positive change in this country. And part of me trying to make that positive change is giving this presentation to you today. But if traveling the world and researching any topic you like sounds interesting to you, doesn't have to be domestic abuse related, doesn't have to be health related, could be any subject you think of, then please check out the churchillfellowship.org. .uk, I think. My head's obscuring the actual link, but just Google Churchill Fellowship and you'll find it. I did want to play you some recording of a conversation I had with Julie because she brought a very different angle.
My ex-partner was arrested for stalking me and then killed himself. He left a suicide note blaming me for his death. We have a 6-year-old daughter together. Off the back of his smear campaign, his friends and family continued his abuse. They tried to change the locks of my house. Their solicitors threatened civil and criminal remedies against me. It's honestly a shit show. His suicide is an act of misogyny and coercive control. There's no part of our lives that's not been impacted by his decision. Our hearts, our bodies, our mental health, my career, our friendships, and our capacity to exist fully in the world. His cruelty is overwhelming. On bad days, I wrestle with the shame that maybe I am to blame for his death. By leaving, by protecting my daughter, by calling the police. His friends and family are quick to give me that blame. But the fact that you choose to not put up with somebody else abusing you, that doesn't make you responsible for whatever they choose to do next.
And I think this is really important for a couple of reasons, actually. So when I started looking at this issue, I was often told by domestic abuse charities down here in Kent that, oh yeah, we know perpetrators, they often threaten to take their own lives as a way of coercively controlling their victims, and apparently that is quite common. I think what my research has shown, or I'm sure you guys knew anyway, is that actually a lot of times that's not an empty threat. They will actually follow through, and that is what I think, and Julie agrees, that it is actually the ultimate act of coercive control. Because as you can see here, Julie's life and that of her daughter are now forever going to be impacted by their perpetrator's decision to take his own life. It was also really critical that we as support services get better at supporting people like Julie. Julie told me that when she first reached out for support, both DA charities and suicide bereavement charities said, oh, you must be so happy that he's dead and the abuse has stopped. neither of those things were true. The abuse didn't stop. It just transferred to his friends and family. And of course, she wasn't happy he was dead. She never wanted him to die. She just wanted the abuse to stop. So 66 recommendations. They're grouped into 10 different groups: supporting young people, providing better support for women and girls, providing better support for men and boys, etc., etc. And I won't go through all 66, but if I just focus on the main one that I think we could all put into our practice tomorrow, is we just need to much more frequently, and I would say almost every time that you meet or you are talking with a victim of domestic abuse, you ask them, are they contemplating suicide? Have they ever made a suicide attempt in their lives? Because without knowing the answer to those questions, you will not be able to complete number 2 on my recommendations, which is that every domestic abuse safety plan should include sections on how to keep victims safe from the suicide. And if you don't know whether they're thinking about suicide or whether their risk is enhanced because they've previously attempted suicide, you won't know what to put on those safety plans. I won't labour the point on all of these other recommendations, but please check out the full report if you want to know more. I know that asking about suicide is difficult, but I do think it's really important. So we've kind of developed this kind of toolbox of information you need to find out. We've also highlighted that actually if somebody says that they're suicidal, that can mean very different things to different people. So quite a lot of people feel suicide with just, oh, I don't want to be here anymore, I'm fed up with life, blah, blah, blah. That's very different to those people who say they're suicidal, who have a plan, have a timescale in mind, and have a method in mind. And your response as a professional and a practitioner needs to be very different depending on where they are on that scale. This is a very simple example of a suicide safety plan. I believe that all kind of domestic abuse safety plans should be amended and adapted to include sections on suicide prevention. Just wanted to highlight that this is a checklist developed by Safe Lives around how to identify who is doing harm to who when there are counter allegations and both parties in the relationship claim to be the victim of domestic abuse. So again, Google Safe Lives. Apologies that the link that I've added on has cut that off, but it's how to respond to counter allegations by Safe Lives. And I think that is where I'll end this presentation. So I hope that was helpful. Please get in touch with me, tim.woodhouse@kent.gov.uk, if you want to have to continue the conversation or have any questions. And I hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you.